The first thing I saw that morning was a yellow skid steer chewing through my survey stakes like they were weeds, and the woman giving the orders was standing there in white linen pants, holding a travel mug, looking like she had just stepped out of a country club brochure. I had paid to have those stakes set less than 20 hours earlier. 38 of them, everyone marked, mapped, photographed, and filed with the county. And there she was at 5:58 in the morning, pointing at my land like she owned the sunrise. Her name was Marla Vance, president of the Ridgeview Springs Property Association, and the first words she ever said to me were, "Mr. 18th, Keller, you really need to stop being emotional about dirt. Now, I have been called a lot of things in my life. Stubborn, quiet, hard to read, occasionally unpleasant before coffee, and I will accept all of those. But emotional about dirt was new, especially coming from a woman who had just sent a machine across my boundary line before breakfast. I stood there with my coffee in one hand and my phone recording in the other, wearing old boots, a faded ball cap, and the kind of expression my late wife used to call my storm face, because I would get very still right before life became expensive for somebody. "That dirt," I told her, "has a deed attached to it." She smiled at me like I was a confused waiter. Behind her, the skid steer snapped another stake and dragged the orange flag through the dust. My foreman, Boone Sutter, was already walking backward toward the barn with his phone to his ear, calling the sheriff. And Marla did not even notice him because people like Marla rarely look at the help unless they need something carried. She told me Ridgeview Springs had maintained that corner for years. She told me the old owner had allowed access. She told me the neighborhood depended on visual harmony, water security, and responsible land stewardship, which was a pretty little sentence for trespassing with diesel equipment. What she did not know, what nobody on that hill seemed to know yet, was that the land under her shoes had changed hands at 4:12 the previous afternoon, and with it came every subsurface water right beneath the South Mesa, including the old well field that kept her subdivision green and decorative lake blue, and her golf course pretending it belongs somewhere with more rainfall. My name is Grant Keller. I was 52 years old when this started, widowed 4 years, father to 1 son, owner of a ranch I'd spent most of my adult life trying to get back. My father, Ray Keller, lost the original place in 1992 after cattle prices collapsed and a bank in Phoenix decided our family history looked better on someone else's balance sheet. I was 20 then, old enough to understand shame, not old enough to do anything about it. I joined the army, became a reconnaissance scout, learned how to sit still on cold ground for hours and watch a ridgeline until the thing that did not belong finally gave itself away. Later I got into satellite communications, built a small logistics security company in Tucson, sold it to people who wore sneakers with suits, and came home with more money than sense and exactly one plan: buy back the Keller place one parcel at a time before I got too old to walk it. My wife, Maggie, used to say the ranch was the only argument I never got tired of having with God. She died before the last parcel came up for sale. Ovarian cancer, mean and fast, and I still catch myself turning to tell her things when the evening light hits the kitchen window just right. Our son, Owen, was 23 then, finishing wildlife biology at Arizona State, and every Sunday night he called to ask about classes, weather, fences, cows, and whether I was eating something besides gas station burritos. I lied about the last part. The ranch sits in Sangre Verde County, where the desert starts pretending it is high country. All juniper, red dirt, basalt ledges, and long shadows that make a man feel smaller in a useful way. Dry Wash Creek cuts through the south end after a hard rain, and under that stone, deep enough that you forget it is there until somebody tries to steal it, runs the Coyote Basin Aquifer. That aquifer is the reason Ridgeview Springs had fountains at both gates and lawns soft enough to walk barefoot on in August. The closing had happened the day before in the back office of an old attorney named Roscoe Bell, who had known my father, my grandfather, and every county clerk worth bribing since 1978. Though Roscoe would say worth charming, not bribing. He slid the deed across the table, tapped page 17 with a crooked finger, and said, "Grant, this page is the bullet." I remember looking down at the language. All dry legal words. No severed groundwater estate. No recorded easement. No permanent access agreement. All water rights conveyed to buyer. Roscoe made me read it twice. "The subdivision has wells on the South Mesa," I said. "They do," he said. "Are those wells legal?" He took off his glasses and smiled without humor. "They are old, son. Old and legal are cousins, not twins. The seller, a tired cattleman named Porter Rusk, admitted the original developer talked him into allowing well access 21 years earlier with a handshake, a steak dinner, and a promise to keep the road graded. Porter said no money changed hands, no easement was signed, and no one had brought it up again because rich people in subdivisions have a way of turning favors into traditions if nobody stops them. By sunset, I had the deed recorded. By 9 I was asleep, and by dawn, Marla Vance was standing on my land telling a man in a skid steer to tear out the evidence of where my property began. When the deputy arrived, Marla shifted instantly from Queen of the Hill to wounded volunteer, one hand on her chest, voice soft enough to butter toast. She said there had been a misunderstanding, that Ridgeview had always maintained the service corridor, that I was new to the community and probably overwhelmed. I almost laughed at that. Boone did laugh, but he turned it into a cough because Boone had manners when there were badgers nearby. The deputy, a young guy named Luis Mercado, looked at my recording, looked at the busted stakes, looked at the skid steer tracks crossing the line, then looked at Marla and said, "Mom, you need to remove your equipment from Mr. Keller's property." She blinked like the sentence had arrived in the foreign language. "This is association-managed land," she said. I said, "Show me the recorded document." She turned toward me slowly, and for 1 second the country club smiles slicked. Not much, just enough. Enough for me to see the panic behind it. Or maybe not panic yet, maybe just insult. The kind people feel when reality refuses to treat them as management. She gathered herself, promised her attorney would contact mine, and left in a white SUV that had never seen a dirt road it respected. By 8:30 that same morning, 2 more Ridgeview board members were at my gate, a soft-handed real estate man named Camden Price and a retired school principal named Darlene Moss, carrying a binder thick enough to stun livestock. They told me my barn color violated the neighborhood palate. My cattle fencing was visually aggressive. My windmill created undesirable rustic clutter, and my mixed herd did not reflect the refined Western identity Ridgeview Springs wished to project. That last one got me. "You want designer cows?" I asked. Darlene looked down at her notes and said, dead serious, "Uniform black cattle photographs better from the overlooked trail." Boone had to walk away. I leaned on the gate and let the silence stretch until even the cicadas seemed embarrassed. Then I told them the same thing I told Marla. Their authority ended at the fence. Their assumptions ended at my deed. And if they believed they had a right to enter my South Mesa or service those wells, they could mail Roscoe Bell the recorded easement by Friday. Camden swallowed. Darlene stopped writing. Marla, who had been standing a few steps back in oversized sunglasses, smiled again and said, "Mr. Keller, you're making enemies very quickly." I looked past her, toward the mesa, where the morning sun was already heating the stones above the water they had been pulling for 2 decades. "No, ma'am," I said. "I think I'm just meeting the ones I already had." The funny thing about people who are used to getting their way is they mistake silence for surrender, and for the next 10 days, I let Marla Vance enjoy that mistake. Ridgeview Springs kept sending letters, real official-looking things on cream paper with embossed seals, telling me I had 72 hours to correct visual nuisances, remove unauthorized livestock, repaint structures, and submit my land use plan for association review, which was impressive considering my land was not in their association, never had been, and would have rather caught fire than join. Boone brought the first letter into the kitchen and dropped it on the table beside my egg. "They fined you for the windmill," he said. "How much?" $4,000. I looked out the window at that old windmill, turning slow against a pale blue morning, pumping water into a stock tank the same way it had since my grandfather still had black hair. "Tell the windmill to lawyer up," I said. And Boone laughed hard enough to spill coffee on his shirt, but underneath the humor, I knew what Marla was doing. She was not trying to win on one letter. She was trying to build a paper trail that made me look unstable, non-compliant, hostile to the community, a cranky rancher standing in the way of progress. So I built my own paper trail. Only mine had timestamps, GPS coordinates, camera footage, inspection reports, and a lawyer named Roscoe Bell who collected facts the way some men collect knives. The first real move came from the State Environmental Office. A field inspector named Anita Crow rolled up in a dusty green pickup and told me she'd received an anonymous complaint that my cattle were contaminating Dry Wash Creek. Anonymous, in county government language, usually means someone wants to throw a rock without showing their hand. I drove her down to the creek bed myself. It was mostly dry, just shallow pools under cottonwood roots, the kind of water you protect because desert water does not forgive fools. I showed her the buffer fence, the trough system, the rotated grazing charts Boone kept in pencils so neat it looked like schoolwork. Anita walked the whole stretch for almost an hour, took samples, photographed the banks, checked the manure load, and finally stood there with her hands on her hips, looking at the cleanest stretch of seasonal creek in Sangre Verde County. "Mr. Keller," she said, "whoever filed this complaint either has no idea what they are looking at, or they know exactly what they are doing." I said, "My guess is the second one." She did not smile, but her eyes did. Before she left, she told me Ridgeview Springs had been the subject of 3 water use irregularity questions over the last 5 years, none formally pursued because the paperwork always seemed just vague enough to die on somebody's desk. That was the first time I felt the shape of the thing under my boots, not just trespass, not just arrogance, but a system of assumptions stacked so long nobody wanted to be the first person to kick it. That afternoon, I drove into town and bought 12 cellular trail cameras, a handheld survey GPS, steel post sleeves, 2 lock boxes, and a black notebook thick enough to look dramatic, which Boone immediately named the Book of Marla. Every morning after that, he rode the South Mesa and wrote down what he saw: tire tracks, cut wire, fresh boot prints near the well road, Ridgeview maintenance carts stopping at the service gate and turning around when they spotted cameras. Once, Camden Price parked on the county shoulder and stared through binoculars for 20 minutes, which would have been more intimidating if he had not done it from a silver Range Rover with a vanity plate that said Closser. I called my son Owen that Sunday and told him the short version. He listened quiet, the way his mother used to listen, letting the empty spaces do some of the work. Then he said, "Dad, are you in danger?" "Not yet. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be." He sighed, and I could hear a college noise behind him, somebody laughing, a door closing. A life that had not yet learned how land can hold grief like clay holds rain. Mum would tell you not to go cowboy. Your mother married a Keller. She gave up that argument early. He laughed, but then he got serious. "Just do it clean, Dad. Whatever you do, make sure nobody can say you acted out of anger." That stayed with me. Do it clean. So that is what we did. Roscoe pulled the old records. Porter Rusk signed an affidavit saying there had never been a written easement, and a survey crew came out to restake the entire south boundary with iron-sleeved markers no skid steer could casually bully. The well field, once mapped properly, sat 109 yards inside my new property line, not on the edge, not in some gray area, not close enough for a lawyer to squint at, but 109 measured yards inside Kellerland. Roscoe stared at the plat in his office for a long time, then said, "Grant, these people have been walking into your pantry for 21 years and calling it a community tradition." I asked him what came next. He opened a folder and slid 3 drafts across the desk. Notice of trespass. Demand for accounting of all water pumps since 2004. Motion for injunction to stop unauthorized operation of the wells. "We do not serve these yet," he said. "Why not?" "Because Marla thinks this is about manners. Let her say that in public first." 2 days later, she did exactly that. Ridgeview filed a petition with the county commission requesting a public necessity access corridor across my South Mesa, framed as drought resilience and emergency water security for vulnerable families, which sounded noble until you noticed the proposed corridor ran straight to the illegal well field and nowhere else. Martha gave an interview to a local lifestyle station wearing turquoise earrings and concern on her face, saying I was an absentee speculator threatening a peaceful neighborhood's water future. I watched it on my laptop while Boone stood behind me eating pretzels. When she said I had no roots in the community, Boone nearly choked. "Your granddad's name is carved in the courthouse bench," he said. "Twice," I told him. "Once for sleeping, once for fighting." That night, Roscoe called a hydrogeologist named Dr. Rold, Helen Mercer, who had spent 30 years studying desert aquifers and had the personality of a hammer wrapped in tweed. She arrived the next morning in dusty boots, walked the mesa for 2 days, drilled test bores, read fracture lines in the basalt, and spread maps across my kitchen table like she was dealing cards in a very expensive poker game. Her conclusion was simple enough for even me. Ridgeview's wells were not just located on my land. Most of the water feeding them entered the aquifer through my land, moved through my rock. and gathered under my mesa before their pumps pulled it toward a 12-acre ornamental lake where retired executives played paddleboard yoga at sunrise. Under current drought conditions, she said, tapping a map with one blunt fingernail, if those pumps stop, the lake drops to mud in about 31 days. Their turf irrigation fails sooner. Their tap water gets cloudy before that. I asked her the value of the water rights. She looked at Roscoe, then back at me. Conservatively, tens of millions. I remember the room going quiet except for the refrigerator humming and a fly ticking against the screen door. I did not feel rich. I felt tired. There is a strange weight that comes with learning somebody has been taking from you for years, especially when what they took was invisible. You cannot point to an empty space in the ground and say, "There, that is where my father was disrespected. That is where my wife would have told me to breathe. That is where my son may someday understand why I cared so much." But I felt all of that at once. Then the anonymous letters started. 4 of them, no return addresses, all from inside Ridgeview. One said Marla had raised emergency dues to fund the legal fight. One said residents with Brownwater were being told to keep quiet until after the county hearing. One included a photograph of an old ranch map from 1968, labeled Kellis South Pasture, with a well site marked clear as day. The last letter was from a widower named Thomas Vale, who wrote that he had voted for Marla because she promised order after his wife died, and now he was ashamed because order had turned into cruelty. I read that one twice. There it was, the human part, the thing people miss when they talk about HOAs like they are cartoon villains. Marla had not risen because everyone around her was evil. She had risen because frightened people like rules, grieving people like certainty. And comfortable people often choose not to ask where the water comes from as long as the lawn stays green. But sympathy is not the same as permission. By mid-June, Roscoe had everything ready. Dr. Munt? Mercer filed her report with the county and the water district. Boone installed backup power on the cameras and sensors on the well housings. I met quietly with Sheriff Daniel Rourke and showed him the footage. The survey, the filings, the threats. He was an old desert lawman with a mustache that looked like it had survived 3 administrations. He listened, then said, "Grant, people like this usually do something dumb right before they lose." He was right. At 2:13 in the morning, 3 nights before the county hearing, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Motion alert, South Meserwell Field. I opened the camera feed and saw 5 figures in dark hoodies moving through the junipers, 2 at the electrical box, 2 at the pump housing, and 1 standing back with a flashlight held low. The standing figure turned just enough for the camera to catch white linen, turquoise earrings, and the stiff little posture of a woman who still believed consequences were for other people. I called Sheriff Rourke. He answered on the first ring. "I see them," I said. "Stay in the house," he said. "We are already rolling." I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, phone blowing in my hand, watching 5 people try to break a water system they had spent 2 months telling the county belonged to them. There is a special kind of stupidity that only shows up after midnight, when pride has had too much time to talk itself into a plan, and Marla Vance had apparently brought a whole committee of it with her. 2 men were working bolt cutters at the service panel. Another had the pump housing open and was taking pictures like he was gathering proof for a story he had not written yet. A 4th kept looking toward the ranch road, and Marla stood just beyond the flashlight spill, one hand on her hip, chin lifted, still supervising, still managing, still believing she was the adult in every room even when the room was my land at 2:13 in the morning. I did what Sheriff Rourke told me. I stayed inside. That may not sound like much, but every old instinct in me wanted boots on. Rifle down, headlights off, walk out there and introduce them to the kind of conversation men used to have before lawyers got expensive. But Owen's voice was in my head. "Do it clean, Dad." And Maggie's too, quieter, steadier, the way she used to say, "Grant, don't let fools decide what kind of man you are." So I sat there and watched. 7 minutes later, 2 sheriff's trucks came in from the county road with their lights off, one taking the lower wash, one coming over the cattle track behind the mesa. On the camera feed, the 5 figures froze before I heard anything in real life, because radio travels faster than consequences. Then the floodlights came on. Deputy voices crept across the dark. "Hands up. Step away from the equipment. Do it now." The bolt cutters hit the dirt first, then a pry bar, then a camera. Marla raised both hands slowly, not like a criminal, more like a woman offended that gravity had applied to her. When Sheriff Rourke called me 20 minutes later, I was already on the porch with coffee because apparently I am incapable of facing a felony without behaving like somebody's grandfather. He walked up the steps, took the mug I handed him, looked out at the first faint grey line over the desert, and said, "Grant, I have arrested people for dumb things in this county for 34 years, but trying to sabotage regulated wells you are claiming in a public petition 3 days before a hearing is a fresh kind of dumb." I asked who the others were. 2 Ridgeview maintenance contractors, Camden Price's nephew, a private security man paid in cash, and Marla herself. She had told the deputies she was documenting unsafe infrastructure. Rourke looked at me over the rim of the mug. "With bolt cutters?" he said. "Must have been a thorough documentary," I said. He laughed once, tired and dry, then told me to call Roscoe. By sunrise the story was already breathing. By noon, the Sangre Verde Ledger had it on the front page. Ridgeview president arrested at disputed well site, and by dinner, Phoenix stations were running helicopter footage of Marla's white SUV being towed off my ranch road like the world's saddest parade float. The county hearing went forward anyway, which is how you know bureaucracy has stronger legs than common sense. The commission room was packed, ranchers in pearl snap shirts on one side, Ridgeview residents in resort casual on the other, reporters lining the back wall. Roscoe beside me with one leather folder, Dr. Helen Mercer with a stack of maps, Porter Rusk in his good hat, Boone sitting behind me with his arms crossed and the expression of a man hoping somebody would be foolish enough to whisper. Marla was not there. Her attorney said she was cooperating with authorities, which was a polite way of saying she was being photographed badly somewhere else. Camden Price stood in for the association, pale around the mouth, his real estate smile twitching like a porchlight full of moths. Their lawyer gave a speech about public need, historic access, vulnerable households, shared resources, all the phrases people use when they want your property but would prefer not to call it taking. He spoke for 12 minutes and never produced a recorded easement. When he sat down, Roscoe stood slowly, because old lawyers understand theatre better than actors. He opened the folder and said, "Madam Chair, before this county considers granting access across Mr. Keller's land, the association must first show that it has any lawful claim to the wells it wants to reach." Then he laid it out, one sheet at a time, the recorded deed conveying all groundwater rights to me, Porter's affidavit stating there had never been a written easement, the certified survey showing the well field 109 yards inside my property, Dr. Mercer's report showing Ridgeview's water draw came largely through the recharge zone under my mesa, the state inspection showing their complaint against my cattle was unfounded. The camera footage from 2:13 in the morning, the room got so quiet you could hear the air conditioner rattling above the flag. Then Roscoe placed the final document down and said, "We are filing a notice of trespass and a demand for accounting on 21 years of unauthorized groundwater extraction." Camden leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. His lawyer did not answer. Behind them, a Ridgeview resident stood, then another. There may be 15 of them, one by one, not shouting, not clapping, just standing there like people who had finally realized the green lawn had a bill attached to it. An older man I later learned was Thomas Vale looked at Camden and said, clear enough for the microphones to catch, "You told us he was stealing from us." Camden stared at the table. The chair denied the petition in less than 2 minutes. Not delayed, not revised, denied. And when her gavel came down, I did not feel victory the way movies tell you victory feels. I felt air come back into my chest. 11 months later, Ridgeview Springs settled. The association was dissolved, the board resigned. Marlowe pleaded guilty to felony trespass, conspiracy, and tampering with critical water infrastructure, and she served 14 months, which I am told she considered very inconvenient for a social calendar. Camden cooperated, paid a fine, and disappeared into commercial leasing, which seems about right. The damages were large enough to make headlines, but I did not keep most of the money. I worked with Roscoe, Dr. Mercer, Porter, and the County Water District to create the Coyote Basin Land and Water Trust, protecting the recharge zone, restoring the wash, fencing the sensitive springs, and funding a scholarship in my father's name for rural students studying water science, ranch management, or wildlife conservation. The first public trail day, Owen came home and walked a group of 4th graders across the mesa, explaining how rain disappears into stone and comes back years later as life. I stood near the old windmill and watched him point toward the ridge, and for a second I could see Maggie there beside him. smiling like she had known all along the land would teach us how to survive losing her. So that is the story. A woman tore out my survey stakes because she thought power was whatever you could say loudly in a meeting. She lost because paper is patient. Cameras are quiet, water remembers its path, and truth does not care how nice your neighborhood sign looks at sunset. But here is the part I still wrestle with. Most of the people in Ridgeview were not villains. They were comfortable. They trusted the wrong people. They liked the lake. They liked the rules when the rules protected their view. And maybe that is how these things always start. Not with evil, but with convenience. So tell me what you think. Was I right to let it play out until they exposed themselves? Or should I have shut the wells down the first week and forced the truth into daylight sooner? Have you ever seen a board, a neighbor, a company, or a community turn a favor into an entitlement? Drop your county, your state, and your side of the line in the comments. I read everyone, especially the ones that disagree with me, because around here, if there is one thing the desert teaches, it is that the truth usually lives deeper than the first place people dig.